Ever wondered why your fish aren't growing with your discus or your angelfish and some other varieties of fish? Why aren't they growing? You're doing all the water changes, you're feeding them well, you feed them twice a day, and all you're seeing is that some of them are doing very, very well and the others just seem to be lagging behind. These questions and more will be answered very shortly. Hello everyone, welcome back to Blue Fin Aquatics, where we share our knowledge and experience with you. So on the opener we were talking about your fish aren't growing, specifically with discus and angelfish. Well, we're here to answer that question for you. What it basically is, when you get say 6 discus in, which we generally let people know to get 6 because then you're bound to get a pair out of those at a very young age, some of them seem to grow very, very well and some just seem to lag behind. And you're doing all the right things, you're doing your water changes, you're feeding them once or twice a day, and you think that they would start to grow. Well, generally that is the way to go about it, but what generally happens too is that with your discus and your angelfish, some of them seem to grow very, very well at a speedy pace. And that's basically because they eat more food and they basically just pig on all the food that's around. So that's basically what they do. So with the smaller ones, obviously they're not getting as much food as the bigger ones. So generally what you need to be looking at there is, with your discus fish especially, with the smaller ones, you may need to take them out and put them in another tank. Just give them the fair share of food to grow them a bit. But sometimes it can be like 2-3 months down the track and you think to yourself, they still aren't growing and I'm doing all the right things. Well, basically you'll see your other fish growing really well and they're getting to size, but these ones still sit behind. Now, the way to know if your fish is actually stunted because of growth, not eating enough and so forth, in the early days when you first get them, you generally look at the eye, and the eye is in basic comparison with the body. So with that, you know that they're okay. Now over time, what generally happens is that the ones that sort of lag behind the smaller discus, they're generally the ones that'll basically be stunted, where you'll be able to tell where their eye is far bigger than the ratio of their body. So generally that's when you can notice that they're stunted. Now the hardest thing to that is that to take them and get them up to full size is going to be very, very difficult, because the stunting process has already started. So what basically you need to do, if you want to keep these fish and you want to give them even go at growing, if you like, put them into another tank and just see how it goes from the early stages. But if not, what generally happens is you'll have bigger discus and smaller discus as well. So that's something really to look out for. And generally too, that if the smaller discus are getting bullied by the bigger discus, that's another way too, where they just won't come out to eat and they sort of basically fade away to nothing. And one thing with discus too, once they get bullied and in a corner and they refuse to eat, well, then basically what happens, they start to become emaciated, and then therefore they will die in time. This is one of those things with discus that you've really got to look out for. People say they're hard to breed and hard to keep. No, they're not. You generally do the best you can and feed your discus or your angelfish evenly, and sometimes that can be very, very difficult to do, especially if they're not coming out to eat whilst you are there. So something to think about. Look at your discus, see if their eye is bigger than the body when you go to buy your discus for a start. Make sure that their eye is in ratio with the body itself. If the eye is bigger than the actual body ratio, well, you know that fish is actually stunted and it's one to stay away from. So there's some things you need to be looking at too. And when you do get your fish home, and once you quarantine them, you take them out of the quarantine, have a look at them and just see how they're going, and just make sure when you do feed them that they're all getting a fair share of the food. If this is not the case, then what may happen is you may need to take that 1 or 2 out and put them in another tank, which is not always possible, obviously. But at the end of the day, you can only do your best, and if they're being bullied and they're hiding, well, they're not going to eat as much or basically eat at all, because they'd be too scared to come out and be bullied again. So as we're saying, hope you learnt something out of this video in regards to your discus and angelfish and the stunting process, if you like. So just remember, when you go to your local fish shop, just have a good look at the fish and just make sure that it's not stunted, and to have a really good look at the fish. It could be a beautiful fish and you want it and so forth, but it just just won't grow for you. And again, for breeding purposes, you're just not going to get it there to breed. Well, we do hope you got a lot out of this video in regards to stunting, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.